really thought 2 years in a cage would break me, Daniel. I laughed into the cold morning air as the prison gates slammed shut behind me. My husband had watched me get dragged away in handcuffs. His mistress had smiled from the courtroom gallery. They had celebrated with champagne while I rotted in a cell. But here is what they never knew. I spent 730 days memorizing every account number, every shell company, every dirty secret Daniel whispered in his sleep during our 20-year marriage. I kept a list of names. I recorded every prison visit. I tracked every dollar his mistress spent. And 3 days ago, I made one phone call that set everything in motion. So when I walked out of that facility and saw the black SUV waiting for me, I did not feel fear. I felt power. Because today, Daniel Ashford would learn that the woman he buried alive had clawed her way back from the grave, and she brought hellfire with her. Patricia stepped out of the SUV. She was not smiling. Patricia never smiled. That was one of the things I liked about her. "It's done," she said. "The files hit every major news outlet at 6 this morning. Federal prosecutors received the evidence package at 7, and Daniel's bank accounts were frozen 20 minutes ago." I looked at my watch. It was 8:47 a.m. How long before he knows? He already knows. My contact at the penthouse said he threw his phone through the window when he saw the headline. Good. Let him panic. Let him feel what I felt when those handcuffs clicked around my wrists. Let him taste the fear that kept me awake for 730 nights. And Victoria. Patricia's jaw tightened. She tried to run. Booked a flight to Switzerland last night, but we flagged her passport. TSA detained her at JFK 2 hours ago. I closed my eyes and let that sink in. Victoria Chen. The woman who had slept in my bed, who had worn my jewelry and driven my car and smiled at my children while plotting my destruction. The woman who had planted evidence in my office and forged my signature on fake invoices and whispered lies into my husband's ear. She was sitting in a detention cell right now, probably screaming for her lawyer, probably threatening everyone within earshot. But no lawyer could save her. Not anymore. "Take me to my children," I said. Patricia hesitated. "Caroline, we talked about this. Daniel has full custody, and after everything he's told them..." "I know what he told them. I know they think I'm a thief and a liar and a criminal. But they're about to see their father arrested on national television. They need to hear the truth from me first. They might not listen. They're my children, Patricia. They'll listen." I got in the SUV. Patricia followed. And as we pulled away from the prison, I thought about the last time I had seen my kids, 14 months ago. James had looked at me with disgust in his eyes and asked if I had really stolen from his father. I had wanted to scream the truth at him. I had wanted to grab his shoulders and shake him and tell him that his father was a monster who had framed his own wife. But I had said nothing, because back then, I had no proof. Back then, I was just a convicted felon trying to convince her son that the evidence was fake. Everything was different now. My name is Caroline Ashford, 47 years old, former wife of Daniel Ashford, real estate billionaire, former inmate at Federal Correctional Institution in upstate New York, former victim. I am done being a victim. Let me tell you how I ended up in prison, and then let me tell you how I burned my husband's empire to the ground. It started on a Thursday night, 3 years ago. I came home early from a charity gala because I had a migraine. Daniel had told me he would be working late, so I expected the house to be empty. It was not empty. I heard them before I saw them. Laughter coming from the bedroom. A woman's voice low and intimate. And then Daniel's voice saying something I could not quite make out. I walked up those stairs like I was moving through water. Every step felt like it took forever. Part of me knew what I was about to find. Part of me had known for months, maybe years. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the way Daniel looked at me sometimes like I was furniture he had grown tired of. I pushed open the bedroom door. There was my husband naked in our bed, and next to him was a woman I had never seen before. Dark hair, red lipstick, the kind of body that came from expensive trainers and careful diets. She looked at me, and she did not flinch. She did not cover herself or look embarrassed or apologize. She smiled. "Well," she said, "the wife finally figured it out." Daniel scrambled to cover himself. "Caroline, wait, let me explain." "Explain what?" The woman laughed. "Explain that you've been sleeping with me for 3 years. Explain that you're planning to divorce her and take everything. Explain that she's been too stupid to notice." I looked at Daniel, my husband of 20 years, the father of my children, the man I had supported when he was nothing, when he was just a contractor with big dreams and maxed out credit cards. I had believed in him when no one else did. I had stood by him through every failure, every setback, every crisis, and this was how he repaid me. "Get out," I said to the woman. She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, get out of my house now." Daniel grabbed my arm. "Caroline, calm down. Let's talk about this like adults." I yanked my arm away. "Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again." I walked out of that bedroom. I walked down those stairs. I walked out of that house, and I got in my car, and I drove until I could not see straight through the tears. I should have known then. I should have seen what was coming. But I was so focused on the betrayal, so consumed by the pain of discovering my husband in bed with another woman, that I did not notice the trap closing around me. 3 days later, the police came to my door. Detective Morrison was a heavy-set man with tired eyes and coffee breath. He did not look happy to be there. "Mrs. Ashford, I have a warrant for your arrest." I actually laughed. "Arrest for what?" "Embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering." He rattled off the charges like he was reading a grocery list. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." They put me in handcuffs in my own living room. The maid saw. The gardener saw. By evening, it was all over the news. Caroline Ashford arrested for embezzling millions. The headlines destroyed me before I ever set foot in a courtroom. In the weeks that followed, I learned exactly how thoroughly Daniel had set me up. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank accounts in my name that I had never opened. Emails sent from my computer that I had never written. Invoices with my signature that I had never seen. A paper trail so perfect, so complete, so damning, that even my own lawyer looked at me with doubt in his eyes. "Did you do any of this?" Marcus Bell asked me in our first meeting. He was a public defender, young and overworked, and clearly out of his depth. "No, none of it. Daniel set me up." "Can you prove that—" "I could not. Not then. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Daniel hired the most expensive lawyers in the state. They tore apart every argument Marcus made. They presented witness after witness, document after document, all pointing to my guilt. And Daniel sat in the courtroom every day playing the role of the heartbroken husband, the victim of his wife's betrayal. Victoria was there too. I saw her in the gallery watching with those cold eyes, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. She was enjoying this. She was enjoying watching me get destroyed. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced me to 5 years in federal prison. I remember standing there in that courtroom feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. 5 years. For crimes I did not commit. For evidence that was manufactured. For a setup that was so perfect, so complete, that no one believed me when I said I was innocent. Daniel cried when the verdict was read. Actual tears. He told reporters outside the courthouse that he was devastated that he had trusted his wife completely, that he never imagined she was capable of such deception. I wanted to kill him. Instead, I went to prison. The first night at the correctional facility, I lay on a thin mattress in a cell that smelled like bleach and hopelessness, and I made a decision. I would not break. I would not give up. I would survive this, and when I got out, I would make Daniel pay for every single day he stole from me. But revenge requires information, and information requires patience. I spent my first 6 months listening, learning, watching. I worked in the prison library, which gave me access to legal databases and computers. I studied federal fraud cases. I learned about evidence tampering and chain of custody and procedural errors. I became an expert in the very laws that had been used to convict me, and I started making contacts. Prison is full of people with useful skills, hackers serving time for corporate espionage, accountants who had cooked books for Fortune 500 companies, lawyers who had crossed the wrong people. I made friends with all of them. I learned everything they could teach me. But my biggest break came from the outside. Patricia Vance had been watching my case from the beginning. She was a forensic accountant who specialized in fraud investigations, and something about my conviction had never sat right with her. "The evidence was too clean," she wrote in her first letter to me. "Real embezzlers leave messy trails. Your case looked like a textbook example, every piece fitting together perfectly. That's not how fraud works in the real world." I wrote back immediately. I told her everything: the affair, the setup, the way Daniel had hired an army of lawyers while I got a public defender barely out of law school. I told her I was innocent, and I begged her to help me prove it. Patricia did not believe me at first. She was a professional. She dealt in evidence, not emotion. But she agreed to look at the case files just to satisfy her own curiosity. What she found changed everything. The bank accounts that had been opened in my name, the routing numbers traced back to servers in the Cayman Islands, servers that were registered to a shell company that Patricia eventually linked to Daniel's business partner. The emails that proved my guilt, metadata analysis showed they had been created on a computer I had never used in a building I had never entered on dates when I could prove I was somewhere else. Someone had manufactured the evidence, and Patricia was determined to find out who. It took her 8 months of digging, but she finally found the smoking gun. A former assistant to Victoria Chen, a woman named Jennifer, who had been fired for asking too many questions. Jennifer had kept copies of documents she was not supposed to see, and one of those documents was a draft of the fake invoice that had been used to convict me. In the margin in Victoria's handwriting were the words, "Make sure Caroline's signature matches. Daniel wants this airtight." I cried when Patricia showed me that document. For the first time since my conviction, I allowed myself to hope. But hope is a dangerous thing in the American justice system. My appeal was denied. The judge said Patricia's evidence was circumstantial. He said it did not prove conclusively that Daniel and Victoria had framed me. He said the jury's verdict would stand. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear that courtroom apart with my bare hands, but I had learned something important in prison. Anger is a fire that burns the person holding it. If I wanted to win, I needed to be ice. So I went back to my cell, and I kept planning. My children visited me once a month at first. Emma was 16 when I went to prison. The twins James and Thomas were 14. I watched them grow up through thick glass and monitored phone calls. I watched Emma turn 18. I watched the boys start shaving. I watched them change from children into young adults. And I watched them pull away from me. Daniel was working on them. I could see it happening visit by visit. The doubt in their eyes, the questions they asked, the way they started looking at me like I was a stranger. "Dad showed us the evidence," James said during one visit about a year into my sentence. "It looked real, Mom." "It was manufactured," I said. "Your father set me up." James looked at Thomas. Thomas looked away. "That's what Dad said you'd say." Emma stopped coming after that. She said she had college applications to work on. The boys lasted a few more months, but eventually they stopped too. The last time I saw James, he asked me point blank, "Did you really do it?" I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to explain that his father was a liar and a cheater and a criminal. But what was the point? He would not believe me. Daniel had already won. "I love you," I said. "No matter what anyone tells you, I love you." James did not say it back. That was 14 months ago. I have not seen my children since, but I never stopped fighting. Patricia kept investigating, and 6 months ago she found something that changed the entire game. A witness. His name was Robert, and he had worked as Daniel's personal accountant for 15 years. He knew where all the bodies were buried. He had helped Daniel hide money, evade taxes, and frame his wife. And now, dying of terminal cancer with maybe 3 months to live, he wanted to confess. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Robert said in his first recorded interview with Patricia. "I just want to die with a clear conscience." What Robert told us was worse than I ever imagined. He confirmed everything about my case. How Daniel had planned the frame job for over a year, how Victoria had suggested the embezzlement angle because it would destroy my credibility, how they had hired hackers to create the fake email trail and accountants to doctor the financial records. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what Robert told us about Maria. Daniel had been married before me. I did not know this until Robert told Patricia. Daniel had buried that chapter of his life so deep that even I, his wife of 20 years, had never heard Maria's name. Maria had died in a car accident 3 years before Daniel and I met. A tragic accident, the official report said. A drunk driver ran her off the road, but there was no drunk driver. Daniel killed her, Robert said. She found out about his affairs and his financial schemes, and she threatened to go to the police. So he tampered with her car and made it look like an accident. He bragged about it to me once when he was drunk. He said it was the smartest thing he ever did. I had been married to a murderer for 20 years. I had shared a bed with him, raised children with him, built a life with him. And I had never known. But I knew now, and I was going to use that knowledge to destroy him. Armed with Robert's testimony and all the evidence Patricia had gathered, my lawyers filed a new appeal. The court had no choice but to review the case. Robert's confession was too detailed, too specific, too damning to ignore. He named names. He provided documents. He pointed investigators to bank accounts and shell companies and hidden assets. And when federal prosecutors started digging, they found even more than Robert had promised. Daniel Ashford was not just a fraud. He was a criminal mastermind who had been running a Ponzi scheme for 15 years, bilking investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars. The same week my conviction was overturned, I started planning my final move. I was not going to let Daniel get away with a few years in a minimum security facility for financial crimes. I was not going to let him serve his time and come out and rebuild his empire and live the rest of his life in comfort. No. Daniel Ashford was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And I was going to make sure of it. I contacted the FBI about Maria. I gave them Robert's recorded confession. I gave them the name of the corrupt police officer who had covered up the murder. I gave them everything they needed to reopen a 23-year-old cold case. And then I waited. The murder investigation moved slowly as I expected. Cold cases are difficult. Evidence deteriorates. Witnesses die. But Robert's confession was powerful, and the FBI was motivated. They tracked down the corrupt cop, a man named Frank Morrison, who was now dying of emphysema in Florida. Like Robert, Frank wanted to clear his conscience before the end. Daniel paid me $50,000 to rule Maria's death an accident, Frank told federal investigators. I destroyed evidence. I intimidated witnesses. I've lived with the guilt for 23 years, and I'm tired of carrying it. Frank's testimony, combined with Robert's, was enough to charge Daniel with first-degree murder. That was 3 days ago. Yesterday, I made one phone call, and today, everything came together. The SUV pulled up to Emma's apartment building near Columbia. Patricia had done her research. Emma had an 8 a.m. class on Wednesdays, which meant she would be leaving soon. "Are you sure about this?" Patricia asked. I was not sure. I was not sure about anything anymore, but I had to try. I got out of the SUV and walked toward the building entrance. My heart was pounding. My palms were sweating. I had faced down federal prosecutors and survived 2 years in prison, but the thought of seeing my daughter made me more nervous than any of that. The door opened. Emma walked out. She looked so much like me at that age. Same blonde hair, same sharp cheekbones, same stubborn set to her jaw. She was looking at her phone, not paying attention to her surroundings. "Emma?" She looked up. Her face went through 3 emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, recognition, and then something cold, something guarded. "Mom!" She said the word like it tasted bad in her mouth. "What are you doing here? I need to talk to you." "I don't think we have anything to talk about. Your father is being arrested right now, for murder." That stopped her. She stared at me, her phone hanging forgotten in her hand. "What?" "He killed his first wife. 23 years ago. The FBI has been investigating for months, and they have enough evidence to charge him. It's going to be all over the news by lunchtime." Emma shook her head slowly. "You're lying." "I'm not lying, Emma. I never lied to you. Not once in your entire life." "You stole from Dad's company. You went to prison. I was framed. Your father and his mistress manufactured the evidence. My conviction was overturned 3 days ago." "I don't believe you." I pulled out my phone. I showed her the news alerts. The headlines screaming about Daniel Ashford's arrest, the pictures of him being led away in handcuffs, the statements from federal prosecutors about evidence of murder. Emma read in silence. Her face went pale. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It's real. Everything I told you was real. Your father is a monster, Emma. He framed me to get me out of the way so he could be with his mistress. He killed his first wife when she threatened to expose him, and he spent 2 years lying to you and your brothers, turning you against me while I rotted in a cell for crimes I didn't commit." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm just asking you to look at the evidence and make up your own mind." She stared at me for a long moment. I could see the war happening behind her eyes. Everything she had believed for the past 2 years, everything her father had told her, was crumbling, and I knew how that felt. I knew how it felt to have your world destroyed in a single moment. "The boys," she said finally. "James and Thomas. They're at school." "I know. I'm going to see them next. They won't believe you, James especially. He's been so angry since you went to prison. He says—" She stopped. "What does he say?" Emma looked away. "He says he doesn't have a mother anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had known my children were lost to me. I had known Daniel had poisoned them, but hearing it out loud from my own daughter's mouth— "I'm going to get them back," I said. "I'm going to prove to all of you that I'm not the person your father said I was." "And if you can't—" I thought about the question. What if I could not get my children back? What if the damage Daniel had done was permanent? What if I had destroyed my husband only to lose my family forever? "Then at least they'll know the truth," I said. "Even if they can't forgive me, they'll know the truth about their father." Emma wiped her eyes. "I have to go to class." "I understand." She started to walk away, then stopped. "Mom." "Yes." "I don't know if I believe you yet, but I want to. I want to believe that everything Dad said was a lie." "Look at the evidence, Emma. That's all I ask." She nodded once, then walked away. I watched her disappear around the corner, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "Turn on the news, now." I got back in the SUV. Patricia had the TV on, tuned to a cable news channel. The headline across the bottom of the screen made my breath catch in my throat. "Breaking billionaire Daniel Ashford arrested for murder of first wife." There he was, my husband, the father of my children, being led out of our penthouse in handcuffs while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. He looked smaller than I remembered, older. The stress of the past few months had aged him, but then the camera caught his face and I saw something that made my blood run cold. He was smiling. Not a big smile, not an obvious smile, just a small upturn at the corner of his lips, so subtle that most people would not notice. But I noticed. I had been married to that man for 20 years. I knew every expression on his face. And that smile meant one thing. He had a plan. "Patricia," I said slowly, "something's wrong." "What do you mean?" "Look at his face. He's not scared. He should be terrified right now, but he's not." Patricia studied the screen. "Maybe he's just in shock." "No, Daniel doesn't go into shock. Daniel plans. Daniel calculates. Daniel always has a backup plan." I felt ice spreading through my chest. He knew this was coming. He's been preparing. Preparing for what? That was the question. What was Daniel planning? What card did he have left to play? My phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Mrs. Ashford." The voice was male, professional, familiar. "We spoke a few weeks ago. I believe I made you an offer." The threatening phone call. The man who had told me to drop the investigation or face consequences. "What do you want?" "I want to give you some information. Consider it a professional courtesy from one chess player to another." "I'm listening." "Your children, Emma, James, and Thomas. Do you know where they are right now?" My stomach dropped. "Emma's at Columbia. The boys are at school." Are you sure about that? I looked at Patricia. Her face had gone white. What did you do? I demanded. I didn't do anything, Mrs. Ashford, but Mr. Ashford made certain arrangements before his arrest, insurance, you might call it, to make sure his interests were protected. If you hurt my children, no one wants to hurt anyone. This is simply business. Your husband is facing very serious charges. If those charges were to disappear, then your children would be returned safely. If not, he let the silence stretch. You're insane. The FBI has evidence. Robert's testimony, Frank Morrison's confession. There's no way to make this go away. Mrs. Ashford, you've been out of prison for less than 12 hours. You've been so focused on your revenge that you haven't stopped to ask an important question. What question? Why would Daniel Ashford let himself get arrested without a fight? The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand. My mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. Daniel had known I was coming for him. He had months to prepare ever since Robert started talking to the FBI. So why had he just sat there and waited? Why had he let himself get arrested? Because he had a plan. He always had a plan. Emma, I said. Call Emma, now. Patricia was already dialing. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. She tried again. No answer. The boys, I said. Call the school. Find out if they're there. Patricia called the school. I watched her face as she listened. I watched the color drain from her cheeks. What? I demanded. What is it? Patricia lowered the phone. James and Thomas were signed out of school an hour ago by their father's lawyer. My heart stopped. That's not possible. Daniel is in custody. The lawyer said he had authorization, said there was a family emergency. A family emergency? Daniel's arrest. Of course the school would believe it. Of course they would release the boys to their father's lawyer during a crisis. Emma, I said, we have to find Emma. We drove to Columbia at twice the speed limit. I tried calling Emma over and over. No answer. I texted her. No response. I felt like I was going to throw up. After everything I had survived, after 2 years in prison and months of planning and one perfect day of revenge, Daniel was still one step ahead of me. He had taken my children. He had taken my children again. We found Emma's apartment. The door was unlocked. The place was empty. Signs of a struggle. A lamp knocked over. A chair pushed back. Emma's phone on the floor screen cracked. Patricia picked up the phone. There was a text message from an unknown number. Your mother made a mistake. Now you pay for it. I sank to my knees in my daughter's empty apartment. The weight of what had happened was crushing me. I had been so focused on destroying Daniel that I had forgotten the most important rule. When you go to war, you have to protect what matters most. And I had failed. I had failed my children again. Caroline. Patricia knelt beside me. We're going to find them. The FBI is already involved. They have resources tracking capabilities. Daniel planned this for months, I said. He's been moving money, setting up safe houses, arranging escape routes. He knew exactly what I was going to do, and he countered it before I even made my move. So what do we do? I looked up at her. And despite the terror, despite the despair, despite everything I felt, something else stirring in my chest. Rage. Cold-focused, absolutely lethal rage. I spent 2 years in prison learning how to think like a criminal, I said. I know how Daniel operates. I know his patterns, his contacts, his habits. He thinks he's outsmarted me. He thinks taking my children gives him leverage. Doesn't it? I stood up slowly. My legs were shaking, but my voice was steady. Daniel made one mistake. He underestimated me once, and it cost him everything. He's about to find out that he underestimated me again. What are you going to do? I looked at Emma's cracked phone in Patricia's hand, at the threatening text message glowing on the screen, at the evidence of my daughter being dragged away by men working for my husband. I'm going to find my children, I said, and then I'm going to make Daniel wish he had never been born. Patricia stared at me. How? I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile I had learned in prison, the smile that made other inmates step out of my way. Daniel thinks he knows all my secrets. He thinks he knows everything I learned in 2 years behind bars. But there's one thing he doesn't know. What's that? I wasn't just planning his downfall. I was planning for this exact scenario, the scenario where he tried to use my children against me. I pulled out my own phone and dialed a number I had memorized months ago, a number that connected me to people who operated outside the law, people who owed me favors, people who would do anything for the right price. The phone rang twice before someone answered. "This is Caroline Ashford," I said. "I need to call in that favor." All of the line connected after 2 rings. A woman's voice, sharp and professional, answered in Russian-accented English. "I was wondering when you would call." Caroline gripped the phone tighter. "Natasha, I need your team, tonight." "The children." Daniel took them. "All 3. Silence on the other end. Then Natasha spoke again, her voice colder than before. "That man never learns. Send me everything you have. Locations, contacts, anyone Daniel trusts. We move in 2 hours." Caroline ended the call. Patricia was staring at her with a mixture of fear and admiration. "Who was that?" "Someone I met in prison. She runs a private extraction team, former military. They specialize in finding people who don't want to be found." "Caroline, this is dangerous. If something goes wrong..." Something already went wrong. Caroline picked up Emma's cracked phone from the floor. "Daniel has my children. There's nothing more dangerous than that." They left Emma's apartment and drove to a warehouse in Brooklyn that Natasha had designated as a meeting point. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but inside it was a fully operational command center. Screens covered one wall displaying satellite feeds and tracking data. A dozen men and women in tactical gear moved with military precision. Natasha was waiting for them. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with silver hair cut short and scars on her hands that told stories Caroline had never asked about. They had shared a cell block for 6 months, and in that time, Caroline had learned 2 things about her. Natasha never broke a promise, and Natasha never failed a mission. "Show me what you have," Natasha said without preamble. Caroline spread her files across a metal table. Daniel's known properties, his business associates, the offshore accounts Patricia had traced, the network of lawyers and fixers who did his dirty work. Natasha studied the documents with sharp eyes. "Your husband is careful, multiple layers of protection. But everyone makes mistakes." "What mistakes?" Natasha pointed to a name on one of the documents. "Marcus Webb, Daniel's head of security. He was military intelligence before he went private. I know him." "You know him how?" "We worked together in Chechnya 20 years ago." Natasha smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Marcus has a weakness. His daughter. She lives in Boston with her mother. Marcus would do anything to protect her." Caroline understood immediately. "You want to use his daughter as leverage. I want to give Marcus a choice. Help us find your children or watch his own daughter disappear." Patricia stepped forward. "That's kidnapping. We can't..." "We can," Caroline cut her off. "Daniel took my children. He doesn't get to play by rules he already broke." Patricia looked horrified. "Caroline, this isn't you. You're not a criminal." "I spent 2 years in prison for crimes I didn't commit. I learned a lot about what I'm capable of." Caroline turned back to Natasha. "Do it. Whatever it takes. I want my children back." Natasha nodded and started issuing orders to her team. Within minutes, they had a plan. 2 units would locate Marcus Webb and apply pressure. A 3rd unit would monitor Daniel's known associates. And Caroline would wait. Waiting was the hardest part. She sat in that warehouse, watching the screens, drinking bitter coffee, and thinking about her children. Emma, who had looked at her with such doubt that morning. James, who had told her he didn't have a mother anymore. Thomas, who had simply stopped responding to her letters. Had she failed them? Had she been so focused on revenge that she had forgotten what really mattered? No, she had done this for them. She had done this so they would know the truth about their father. So they would understand that their mother was not a thief, or a liar, or a criminal. But none of that mattered if they were dead. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered immediately. "Mrs. Ashford." It was the same male voice from before. "I see you've been busy." "Where are my children?" "Safe, for now. But that can change very quickly." "What do you want?" "I told you what I want. Make the charges against Daniel disappear. Get him released. And your children come home unharmed." That's impossible. The FBI has evidence, witness testimony. I can't make that disappear. Then I suggest you find a way. You have 24 hours. Wait. Caroline's mind was racing. Let me talk to them. Let me talk to my children. I need to know they're alive. A pause, then a rustling sound, and Emma's voice came through the phone, shaky and scared. Mom. Emma, are you okay? Are the boys with you? We're okay. We're scared, but we're okay. Mom, these men, The phone was taken away. The male voice returned. Satisfied. 24 hours, Mrs. Ashford. Don't waste them. The line went dead. Caroline sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Emma's voice echoed in her head. Mom. She had called her mom, not the cold, distant word she had used that morning. A scared child calling for her mother. We got something. Natasha's voice snapped Caroline back to reality. Marcus Webb. My team has him. They patched in a video feed. Marcus Webb was tied to a chair in what looked like a basement. He was a big man, military bearing, but he looked terrified. Ask him, Caroline said. Natasha spoke into a radio. One of her operatives stepped into frame and addressed Marcus directly. Where is Daniel Ashford keeping the children? Marcus shook his head. I don't know. I swear to God, I don't know. You're his head of security. You know everything. Not this. Daniel planned this himself. He didn't trust anyone with the details. The operative hit him, hard. Marcus's head snapped back, blood spraying from his nose. Where are the children? I don't know. Daniel has safe houses all over the country. I don't know which one he's using. Caroline grabbed the radio from Natasha. Marcus, listen to me. My children are somewhere out there scared and alone because your boss is a monster. You have a daughter, Victoria, right? She's 23, lives in Boston, works at a marketing firm. Marcus's face went pale. How do you know about Victoria? I know everything, Marcus. And right now, there are people watching her apartment, waiting for my signal. You wouldn't. You're not like Daniel. I spent 2 years in prison because of Daniel. I learned to be exactly like him. Now tell me where my children are, or your daughter pays for your loyalty. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Caroline could see him struggling, weighing his options, trying to figure out if she was bluffing. She was not bluffing. She had crossed that line the moment Daniel took her children. There was no going back. There's a property, Marcus said finally. Upstate New York. An old hunting lodge Daniel bought years ago under a shell company. It's not in any of his official records. He uses it when he needs to disappear. Address. Marcus gave it to her. Natasha was already pulling up satellite imagery confirming the location. If you're lying to me, Caroline said, Victoria dies. Do you understand? I'm not lying. The lodge. That's where they are. Caroline released the radio. She looked at Natasha. How fast can your team get there? 2 hours, maybe less if we use the helicopter. Do it. Natasha started barking orders. Her team moved with practiced efficiency, loading weapons and equipment. Caroline watched them prepare, and she felt something strange. Not fear, not hope, just cold, absolute determination. She was going to get her children back, and then she was going to make Daniel pay. Patricia touched her arm. Caroline, are you sure about this? If something goes wrong? Something already went wrong. 2 years ago when Daniel framed me. Everything since then has been damage control. This isn't damage control, this is war. Caroline looked at her friend. The woman who had believed in her innocence when no one else did. The woman who had spent 2 years fighting for her freedom. Yes, Caroline said. It is. The helicopter ride was the longest 2 hours of Caroline's life. She sat in the back surrounded by Natasha's operatives, watching the landscape blur beneath them. Patricia had stayed behind. This part was too dangerous for civilians. Natasha sat across from her, checking her weapon with practiced ease. When we land, you stay behind the team. We go in first, secure the perimeter, neutralize any hostiles. Only when I give the signal do you enter. What if my children are hurt? Then we extract them and get medical attention. But I don't think Daniel wants them hurt. They're leverage. Leverage only works if it's alive. Caroline nodded. She knew Natasha was right. Daniel was many things, but he was not stupid. He would keep the children safe as long as he needed them. But what happened when he didn't need them anymore? The helicopter descended toward a clearing about half a mile from the lodge. Natasha's team moved out first, disappearing into the darkness like ghosts. Caroline waited, counting seconds, straining to hear any sound of gunfire or struggle. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Then Natasha's voice crackled through the radio. Perimeter secure. 2 guards neutralized, moving to the main building. More waiting. More silence. Then gunfire. Short bursts controlled. Professional. Caroline grabbed the radio. Natasha, what's happening? Resistance inside. Stay where you are. More gunfire. Shouting. A crash that sounded like breaking glass. Then silence. Caroline couldn't wait anymore. She ran toward the lodge, ignoring Natasha's orders, ignoring the danger. Her children were in there. Nothing else mattered. The lodge was dark except for a few lights in the upper windows. Bodies lay on the ground near the entrance. Daniel's men neutralized by Natasha's team. Caroline stepped over them and pushed through the door. Inside, chaos. Overturned furniture, bullet holes in the walls. One of Natasha's operatives lay wounded on the floor being treated by a teammate. "Where are my children?" Caroline demanded. The operative pointed toward a staircase. "Upstairs, second door on the left. Natasha's with them." Caroline ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The second door on the left was open. She burst through and stopped dead. Emma, James, and Thomas were sitting on a bed, hands bound, eyes wide with terror. Natasha stood guard by the window, weapon raised, watching for threats. And in the corner of the room, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, was Daniel. He looked up when Caroline entered. Despite everything, despite the blood and the pain and the total collapse of his plans, he smiled. "Caroline, I knew you would come." She ignored him. She ran to her children, pulling them into her arms, checking them for injuries, touching their faces to make sure they were real. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "We're okay," Emma whispered. "Mom, we're okay." James was crying, big silent tears rolling down his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I said those things." "It doesn't matter. None of that matters. You're safe now." Thomas just held on to her, not speaking, his whole body shaking. How touching. Daniel's voice cut through the moment. The family reunited. Too bad it won't last. Caroline stood slowly. She looked at the man who had stolen 2 years of her life, who had murdered his first wife, who had kidnapped his own children to use as bargaining chips. "It's over, Daniel. The FBI has everything. Robert's testimony, Frank Morrison's confession, the evidence Patricia found. You're going to prison for the rest of your life." "Am I?" Daniel laughed, even though it clearly hurt him. "You think this is over? You think I haven't planned for this?" "What are you talking about?" "The evidence against me, Robert's testimony, Frank's confession. All of it can be discredited. I have lawyers who specialize in destroying witnesses. I have contacts in the FBI who owe me favors. And I have something else, something you don't know about." Caroline felt ice in her chest. "What?" Daniel's smile widened. "Insurance. A file containing evidence that you were involved in Maria's death." "That's insane. I didn't even know Maria existed until a few months ago." "But can you prove that I've spent 20 years building a narrative, Caroline? A narrative that says you were my accomplice, that you helped me kill Maria, that you've been covering it up ever since." "No one will believe that." "Won't they? You just spent 2 years in prison for fraud. Your credibility is destroyed, and I have documents. Forged, yes, but expertly forged. Good enough to create doubt. Good enough to muddy the waters. Good enough to make sure that if I go down, you go down with me." Caroline stared at him. Even now, even at the end of everything, Daniel was still playing games, still manipulating, still trying to win. But she was not the same woman who had walked into that prison 2 years ago. She had learned things. She had prepared for every contingency. "Natasha," she said calmly, "take the children downstairs." Natasha hesitated. "Caroline, now, please." Natasha nodded. She guided Emma, James, and Thomas out of the room, closing the door behind them. Caroline and Daniel were alone. "So what now?" Daniel asked. "Are you going to kill me? Is that your plan?" "No, I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to destroy you." "You already tried that. Look how well it worked." Caroline walked closer to him, close enough to see the sweat on his brow, the pain in his eyes, the fear he was trying to hide. "You made a mistake, Daniel. You always make the same mistake. You underestimate people. You underestimated Maria, and she almost exposed you. You underestimated me, and I survived everything you threw at me. And now you're underestimating me again? Am I? That insurance file you mentioned, the evidence against me, I know about it." Daniel's smile faltered. "How?" "Robert told Patricia everything before he died, including the location of your backup files, including the contingency plans you put in place years ago." "Robert didn't know." "Robert knew everything, Daniel. He was your accountant for 15 years. You trusted him with every secret, and when he was dying, he gave all those secrets to me." Daniel's face went pale. For the first time, Carolyn saw real fear in his eyes. "Patricia found the file 3 months ago," Carolyn continued. "We made copies, and then we modified it. We replaced the evidence against me with evidence against you, additional evidence. Things Robert told us that we hadn't shared with the FBI yet. Things that would guarantee you spend the rest of your life in a supermax facility." "You're bluffing." Caroline pulled out her phone. She showed him the screen, a document time-stamped 3 months ago, containing everything Robert had confessed, everything Frank Morrison had corroborated, and new information, account numbers, names of accomplices, details of other crimes Daniel had committed over the years. "This file is set to release automatically in 12 hours, to every major news outlet, to the FBI, to federal prosecutors, unless I stop it. What do you want? I want you to confess everything, Maria's murder, the fraud, framing me, all of it, on camera for the record. A full confession that will guarantee you never see the outside of a prison cell again." Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And if I refuse, then this file goes public. And trust me, Daniel, what's in here makes everything the FBI already has look like a parking ticket. You'll be lucky if they don't give you the death penalty." They stared at each other, husband and wife, victim and perpetrator, two people who had once promised to love each other forever. "I always knew you were stronger than you looked," Daniel said quietly. "You made me this way." "I know." He closed his eyes. "Fine, I'll confess, but I want something in return." "You're not in a position to negotiate. Our children, I want to see them one last time before they take me away." Caroline hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to deny Daniel even this small comfort after everything he had done. But she thought about Emma and James and Thomas. They had just watched their father get arrested. They had been kidnapped, terrorized, used as pawns. As much as she hated Daniel, they were still his children. They deserved a chance to say goodbye. "Fine, but I'll be there. And if you say one word to manipulate them, one word to turn them against me again, the deal is off." Daniel nodded slowly. "Agreed." Caroline opened the door. Natasha and the children were waiting in the hallway. Emma looked at her mother with worried eyes. "What happened? It's over. Your father is going to confess to everything." James stepped forward. "Can we see him? I need to—" He stopped, struggling with words. "Yes, you can see him." They entered the room together. Daniel looked at his children, and for the first time, Caroline saw something genuine in his expression. Pain, regret, maybe even love. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "I'm sorry for everything." Emma was crying. "Why, Dad? Why did you do all those things?" "I don't know. I wanted more. I always wanted more, and I didn't care who I hurt to get it." He looked at Caroline. "Your mother was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed her. I destroyed all of us." "You're going to prison," James said. "For the rest of your life." "I know. We'll visit you," Thomas said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. He was the youngest, the quietest. He rarely spoke. "We'll visit you, because you're still our dad, even after everything." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I don't deserve it. But thank you." Caroline watched this moment, this final fragment of a family that had been shattered beyond repair. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a deep, bone-tired sadness. It was over. After 2 years of planning, after months of investigation, after kidnapping and violence and threats, it was finally over. But the cost had been so high. The FBI arrived an hour later. They took Daniel into custody and transported him to a federal facility. Natasha's team melted into the night, leaving no trace of their involvement. And Caroline drove her children back to the city, watching the sun rise through the windshield. Emma sat in the front seat, staring out the window. James and Thomas were asleep in the back, exhausted by everything that had happened. "Mom," Emma said quietly. "Yes. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I didn't visit. I'm sorry I let Dad convince me that you were—" "It's okay, Emma. You didn't know. But I should have. I should have trusted you. You're my mother, and I believed him." Caroline reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Your father is very convincing. He fooled me for 20 years. He fooled everyone. What happens now?" Caroline thought about the question. What did happen now? Daniel would go to trial. He would probably spend the rest of his life in prison. The media would cover every detail, dragging the Ashford name through the mud. Their children would have to deal with the fallout, the whispers, the judgment. But they would be together. For the first time in 2 years, Caroline would have her children back. They would heal. They would rebuild. They would become a family again. "Now we go home," Caroline said, "and we start over." Emma nodded slowly. "I'd like that." The city appeared on the horizon, glittering in the morning light. Caroline felt something she had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not complete peace. Not yet. There were still trials to face, wounds to heal, relationships to rebuild. But she was free. Her children were safe. And Daniel Ashford would never hurt anyone again. The revenge was complete. But the real work was just beginning. 3 weeks after the rescue, Caroline sat in the front row of a federal courtroom watching her husband of 20 years plead guilty to first-degree murder. Daniel looked different in his orange jumpsuit, smaller, older. The confident billionaire who had once commanded boardrooms and intimidated rivals was gone. In his place was a broken man who could barely meet the judge's eyes. "Mr. Ashford, you understand that by pleading guilty, you are waiving your right to a trial by jury. Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that the charges against you carry a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Yes, Your Honor. How do you plead to the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Maria Ashford?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "Guilty." Caroline felt Emma's hand tighten around hers. Her daughter had insisted on attending the hearing, even though Caroline had tried to convince her to stay home. James and Thomas had refused to come. They were still processing everything, still trying to reconcile the father they had loved with the monster he had turned out to be. How do you plead to the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud? Guilty. How do you plead to the charge of obstruction of justice? Guilty. The judge continued through the list of charges. 12 counts in total. Daniel pleaded guilty to every single one. When it was over, the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and ordered Daniel remanded to federal custody. Guards approached to take him away. "Wait," Daniel turned toward Caroline. "Please, can I say something to my wife?" The judge looked at Caroline. "Mrs. Ashford." Caroline hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to deny Daniel even this small moment. But she thought about the children, about closure, about the need to move forward. "Fine. 1 minute." The guards allowed Daniel to approach, though they stayed close. He stopped a few feet from Caroline, his eyes searching her face. "I know you'll never forgive me," he said quietly. "I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that I loved you, In my own twisted way, I loved you. You had a strange way of showing it. I know. I destroyed everything I touched. You. The children. Maria, his voice cracked on his first wife's name. I've been running from what I did to her for 23 years, and when you started getting close to the truth, I panicked. I thought if I could just get rid of you, make everyone believe you were the criminal, I could keep running. You almost succeeded. Almost. But I underestimated you. I always underestimated you. Daniel glanced at Emma, who was watching with tears streaming down her face. Take care of them, please. They're going to need you more than ever. I will. The guards pulled Daniel away. He didn't resist. As he was led through a side door, he looked back one final time. Then he was gone. Emma collapsed against Caroline's shoulder, sobbing. I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe Dad did all those things. I know, sweetheart, I know. Patricia was waiting for them outside the courthouse. The media had gathered in force cameras, flashing reporters shouting questions. Patricia had arranged for a private car to take them out through a back entrance. How are you holding up? Patricia asked once they were safely inside the vehicle. I don't know, Caroline admitted. I thought I would feel different, satisfied, vindicated, but I just feel empty. That's normal. You've been fighting so hard for so long. It's going to take time to adjust. Emma wiped her eyes. What happens to Victoria? Patricia's expression hardened. Her trial starts next week. The prosecutors are confident they can get a conviction. She's facing 15 to 20 years. Good. Emma's voice was cold. She deserves worse. Caroline looked at her daughter with concern. She recognized that anger. She had felt it herself burning in her chest for 2 years, but she had also learned where that anger led. Emma, I know you're hurting, but holding on to that hatred will only destroy you. How can you say that? After everything she did, she helped Dad frame you. She probably knew about Maria. She smiled at us during family dinners while she was sleeping with our father. I know, and she's going to pay for that. But your job isn't to make sure she suffers. Your job is to heal, to move forward, to build a life that isn't defined by what your father and Victoria did. Emma didn't respond. She stared out the window, jaw clenched, and Caroline knew this conversation wasn't over. Back at the apartment, James and Thomas were waiting. James was pacing the living room like a caged animal. Thomas sat on the couch, headphones, and trying to block out the world. How did it go? James asked as soon as they walked in. He pleaded guilty to everything. James stopped pacing. So it's really over. The criminal case is over. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. Caroline sat down heavily. But there's still a lot to deal with. The civil suits, the bankruptcy proceedings, the media attention. And us. James's voice was bitter. We have to deal with being the children of a murderer. James? No, Mom. Don't tell me it's going to be okay. Don't tell me people won't look at us differently. Everyone at school already knows. My roommate asked me if I knew my dad killed someone, like I was hiding it or something. I'm sorry. I know this is hard. Hard? James laughed, but there was no humor in it. 2 months ago, I had a normal life. I had a dad who I thought loved me. I had a future. Now I'm the son of Daniel Ashford, convicted murderer. How am I supposed to come back from that? Caroline stood and walked to her son. He was so tall now, taller than she was, but she could still see the little boy he had been, the one who used to climb into her lap and ask her to read him stories. You come back the same way I did. One day at a time, one step at a time. It's going to be hard. People are going to judge you for something you had no control over. But you are not your father. You never were. I believed him, Mom. I believed everything he said about you. I told you I didn't have a mother anymore. How do I come back from that? You already have. You're here. You're talking to me. That's all that matters. James's face crumpled. He fell into Caroline's arms, sobbing like he hadn't since he was a child. She held him tight, feeling his pain, absorbing it, wishing she could take it all away. Thomas pulled out his headphones. He watched his brother crying, then looked at Caroline with eyes that seemed far too old for 17. Is it true what they're saying? Thomas asked quietly. that Dad killed his first wife because she was going to expose him. Yes, it's true. And he would have done the same thing to you. Caroline hesitated. She had thought about that question many times over the past few weeks. Would Daniel have killed her if she had discovered his secrets before he had a chance to frame her? She wanted to believe the answer was no. But she knew better. I don't know, maybe. Thomas nodded slowly. I'm glad you're okay, Mom. I'm glad you're home. It was the most he had said to her since the rescue. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. The following week, Victoria Chen's trial began. Caroline hadn't planned to attend. She had told herself that watching Victoria face justice wouldn't change anything. The woman was going to prison regardless. Caroline didn't need to be there. But when the day came, she found herself in the courtroom anyway, sitting in the back row, watching. Victoria looked different without her designer clothes and perfect makeup. The prison system had stripped away the armor she had built around herself, leaving behind a woman who looked scared and desperate. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. Evidence of Victoria's involvement in framing Caroline. Records showing she had helped Daniel manufacture the fake invoices and forge signatures. Testimony from Jennifer, Victoria's former assistant, who described in detail how Victoria had bragged about getting rid of Daniel's boring wife. She said Caroline was too stupid to see what was happening, Jennifer told the court. She said it would be easy. Frame her for fraud, get her sent to prison, and then Victoria could have Daniel all to herself. And did Ms. Chen ever express any remorse about her role in Mrs. Ashford's wrongful conviction? No, she laughed about it. She said prison would do Caroline good, teach her to be less naive. Caroline listened to this testimony with a strange sense of detachment. 2 years ago, these words would have filled her with rage. Now she just felt tired. Victoria's defense lawyer tried to paint her as another victim of Daniel's manipulation. She had been coerced, the lawyer argued, threatened. Daniel had controlled her through fear and financial dependence. It might have worked if Victoria hadn't decided to testify in her own defense. She took the stand on the third day of the trial dressed in a plain blue outfit that her lawyer had probably chosen to make her look sympathetic. But nothing could soften the coldness in her eyes. Ms. Chen, the prosecutor began, can you describe your relationship with Daniel Ashford? We were in love. Victoria's voice was defiant. He was going to leave Caroline and marry me. We had it all planned. And were you aware that Mr. Ashford was planning to frame his wife for fraud? Victoria hesitated. Her lawyer had probably coached her on how to answer this question. But Victoria had never been good at following instructions. I knew, and I helped, because Caroline didn't deserve him. She was boring and predictable, and she didn't appreciate what she had. I was doing Daniel a favor. The courtroom murmured. Even the judge looked surprised by Victoria's boldness. So you admit to participating in a conspiracy to frame an innocent woman. Caroline wasn't innocent, she was naive. There's a difference. Victoria leaned forward. Do you know what it's like to love someone who's trapped in a loveless marriage Daniel was suffocating? I set him free. By sending his wife to prison for crimes she didn't commit. By removing an obstacle. Caroline would have been fine. Minimum security. Good behavior. She would have been out in 3 years and could have started over. Instead, she had to be dramatic about it. She had to dig up the past. She had to ruin everything. Caroline couldn't stay silent any longer. She stood up in the back of the courtroom. Ruin everything, her voice carried through the room. You helped my husband frame me for embezzlement. You planted evidence. You testified against me. I spent 2 years in prison. My children thought I was a criminal, and you think I ruined everything. Order. The judge banged his gavel. Mrs. Ashford, please sit down. But Victoria was staring at Caroline now, and something ugly flickered across her face. You should have stayed in prison, Caroline. You should have served your time and moved on, but you couldn't let it go, could you? You had to keep digging. You had to find Robert and get him to talk. You had to destroy Daniel, and now look what's happened. He's going to die in prison. Is that what you wanted? What I wanted was justice. For me, for Maria, for everyone your boyfriend destroyed. Justice. Victoria laughed. You don't care about justice. You care about revenge. You're no better than Daniel. You're just better at pretending. The judge called for order again. Security moved toward Caroline, but she was already walking toward the door. She had heard enough. Outside the courthouse, Caroline found a bench and sat down. Her hands were shaking. Victoria's words echoed in her head. You're no better than Daniel. You're just better at pretending. Was that true? Caroline had done things over the past few months that she never would have imagined herself capable of. She had threatened Marcus Webb's daughter. She had hired mercenaries to rescue her children. She had blackmailed Daniel into confessing. Had she become the very thing she hated, Mrs. Ashford? Caroline looked up. A woman was standing in front of her. Mid-30s, dark hair, expensive suit. Something about her face was familiar. I'm sorry, Caroline said. Do I know you? My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm Maria Ashford's sister. Caroline's breath caught. Maria, Daniel's first wife, the woman he had murdered 23 years ago. I didn't know Maria had a sister. Most people don't. I was living in Spain when she died. By the time I got back for the funeral, Daniel had already convinced everyone it was a drunk driving accident. I never believed him, but I couldn't prove anything. Until now. Until now. Elena sat down on the bench next to Caroline. I watched the news when Daniel was arrested. I saw your interview, and I wanted to thank you. Thank me. For not giving up. For finding the truth. For making sure Daniel finally paid for what he did to my sister. Caroline didn't know what to say. She had been so focused on her own revenge, her own justice, that she had almost forgotten about Maria. The first victim, the woman whose death had made everything else possible. I'm sorry I couldn't do more, Caroline said finally. I'm sorry it took so long. 23 years. Elena's voice was thick with emotion. 23 years I've been waiting for someone to believe me, for someone to see Daniel for what he really is. And you did. You saw him, and you stopped him. I didn't have a choice. He tried to destroy me. He took my children. You had a choice. You could have given up. You could have accepted the conviction and served your time and moved on. But you didn't. You fought. And because you fought, Maria finally has justice. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It showed two young women, arms around each other, laughing at the camera. One of them was Elena. The other was a woman Caroline had never seen before. That's Maria. A year before she died. She was so happy then. She had just gotten engaged to Daniel. She thought she had found her soulmate. Elena touched the photograph gently. She never saw what was coming. None of us did. Elena looked at Caroline with knowing eyes. I heard what Victoria said to you in there, about you being no better than Daniel. Caroline winced. You heard that. Everyone heard it, and I want you to know something. Elena took Caroline's hand. You are nothing like Daniel. Daniel destroyed people for his own gain. He killed my sister because she was inconvenient. He framed you because you were in his way. Everything he did was selfish and cruel and calculated. But I did terrible things too. To get my children back. To make Daniel pay. You did what you had to do. There's a difference between fighting back and being the aggressor, between protecting your family and destroying someone else's. Daniel started this war. You just finished it. Caroline felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much she had been questioning herself, doubting herself, wondering if she had become a monster. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Elena stood up. I have to go. But I wanted you to know that you have a friend in me. Whatever you need, whatever happens next, you're not alone. She walked away, leaving Caroline on that bench with the photograph of Maria still in her hands. Caroline looked at the woman in the picture. Young, beautiful, full of life. A woman who had loved the wrong man and paid the ultimate price. I'm sorry, Caroline said quietly. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. But I promise he'll never hurt anyone again. Victoria was convicted on all counts. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding her guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced her to 18 years in federal prison. Caroline watched the sentencing from the gallery. When Victoria was led away in handcuffs, she turned and looked directly at Caroline. There was no defiance in her eyes anymore, no anger, just fear. "I hope you're satisfied," Victoria said. "I'm not," Caroline replied honestly, "but I'm at peace." The months that followed were hard. The media attention was relentless. Every detail of the Ashford scandal was dissected on cable news and social media. Caroline gave a few carefully controlled interviews, telling her story in her own words, but mostly she focused on her children. Emma dropped out of Columbia. She said she couldn't focus, couldn't face the whispers and stares. Caroline didn't push her to go back. Instead, she helped Emma find a therapist, someone who specialized in trauma and family dysfunction. James threw himself into his studies with almost manic intensity. He was determined to graduate early to get away from the Ashford name to build a new identity for himself. Caroline worried about him, about the way he refused to talk about his feelings, but she gave him space. Thomas was the one who surprised her most. The quiet one, the observer. He started writing. Poems at first, then short stories, then the beginnings of what he said would be a novel about a family destroyed by secrets. "Is it about us?" Caroline asked him one evening when she found him typing away on his laptop at 2 a.m. "Kind of, but not really. It's about what secrets do to people, how they grow and fester and eventually explode." "That sounds heavy." "It is, but it's also honest. And I think people need honest stories right now." Caroline kissed the top of his head. "I think you're right." 6 months after Daniel's conviction, Patricia called with unexpected news. "Daniel wants to see you." Caroline was in the kitchen making dinner. She nearly dropped the phone. "What? He's requested a visit, through his lawyer. He says it's important." "Important how?" "He wouldn't say. But Caroline, you don't have to do this. You've already won. Daniel is in prison for the rest of his life. You don't owe him anything." Caroline thought about it. She had spent so long fighting Daniel, hating Daniel, dreaming of his destruction. And now he was locked away powerless, no longer a threat. What could he possibly have to say to her? "I'll go," she said. "Are you sure?" "No, but I need to see this through to the end." The prison was a maximum security facility in Pennsylvania. Caroline went through multiple checkpoints before being led to a visitation room. Daniel was already there, sitting behind a thick glass partition, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked terrible, gaunt and pale with dark circles under his eyes. Prison had aged him 10 years in 6 months. Caroline picked up the phone on her side of the glass. "You wanted to see me." "Thank you for coming." Daniel's voice was hoarse. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I. What do you want, Daniel?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that caught Caroline completely off guard. "I want to apologize. Really apologize. Not the performance I gave in court. A real apology." "You think that matters now?" "I know it doesn't change anything. I know words can't undo what I did. But I need to say it anyway." He pressed his palm against the glass. "I'm sorry, Caroline. I'm sorry for framing you. I'm sorry for stealing 2 years of your life. I'm sorry for turning our children against you. I'm sorry for Maria. I'm sorry for everything." Caroline stared at him. In 20 years of marriage, she had never heard Daniel apologize for anything. He had always been right, always justified, always the victim of someone else's mistakes. Why now? "Because I'm dying." The words hung in the air between them. "What?" "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. Daniel laughed bitterly. "Ironic, isn't it? I got a life sentence, but I won't live long enough to serve it." Caroline didn't know what to feel: relief, satisfaction, pity, all of those things, and none of them. "I'm sorry," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "Don't be. It's karma, or justice, or whatever you want to call it. I spent my whole life taking things that didn't belong to me. Now something is taking my life. It seems fair." "Nothing about any of this is fair." Daniel nodded slowly. I need to ask you something. A favor. I know I have no right, but I need to ask anyway. What? The children, Emma, James, Thomas. When I'm gone, they're going to need someone to tell them that their father wasn't all bad. That there were moments, even just small ones, when I loved them, when I was proud of them, when I was a real father. You want me to lie to them. I want you to remember the good parts. I know there weren't many. I know I destroyed far more than I built. But there were some good parts, weren't there? Before everything went wrong. Caroline thought about the early years, when Daniel was still struggling, when they had nothing but each other. She remembered him holding Emma for the first time, tears streaming down his face. She remembered him teaching James to ride a bike. She remembered him staying up all night with Thomas when he had the flu. Those memories had been buried under years of betrayal and pain, but they were still there. There were good parts, she admitted. Tell them, please, not now, but someday. When they're ready, tell them their father loved them even if he had a terrible way of showing it. Caroline looked at the man behind the glass. The man who had been her husband, her enemy, her destroyer. She should hate him. Part of her still did. But another part, a part she didn't fully understand, felt something else. Something close to compassion. I'll tell them, she said. Daniel closed his eyes. Thank you. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Daniel spoke again. There's one more thing. Something I never told anyone. What? The money. The assets the government couldn't find. There's about 40 million hidden in accounts overseas. Accounts I set up years ago under names no one knows. Caroline's eyes widened. Daniel? I want the children to have it. After I'm gone. After everything settles down. I want them to be taken care of. He pushed a piece of paper against the glass. The account numbers, the passwords, everything you need. Why are you telling me this? Because I trust you. Despite everything, you're the only person I've ever trusted. And Daniel smiled, and for a moment Caroline saw the man she had fallen in love with 20 years ago. Take care of our children, Caroline. That's all I ask. The guard signaled that time was up. Daniel stood slowly, his movements stiff and painful. Goodbye, Caroline. Goodbye, Daniel. He was led away. Caroline sat there for a long time, staring at the paper with the account numbers, trying to process what had just happened. Daniel Ashford was dying. The man who had destroyed her life, who had murdered his first wife, who had framed her and imprisoned her and turned her children against her, was going to be dead in 6 months, and he had just given her $40 million. Caroline started to laugh. Then she started to cry. Then she did both at the same time, sitting alone in that prison visitation room, holding a piece of paper that represented everything Daniel had left to give. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't redemption, it wasn't even really an apology, but it was something, a final gesture from a dying man who had finally run out of moves. Caroline folded the paper carefully and put it in her pocket. Then she stood up, walked out of that prison, and drove home to her children. Caroline did not tell her children about the money right away. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out how to explain that their dying father had hidden $40 million in offshore accounts, while their mother rotted in prison for a crime she did not commit. But she could not keep Daniel's illness a secret. She gathered them in the living room that evening. Emma was curled up on the couch with her phone. James was doing homework at the kitchen table. Thomas was typing on his laptop, working on his novel. I need to tell you something, Caroline said, about your father. James looked up sharply. What now? Did he escape? Is he trying to contact us? No, nothing like that. Caroline took a deep breath. I went to see him today. He asked to see me and I went. Emma put down her phone. Why would you do that? Because he's dying. He has pancreatic cancer. The doctors say he has 6 months. Silence. Caroline watched the information hit each of her children differently. Emma's face went blank, like someone had switched off the lights behind her eyes. James's jaw clenched, his hands forming fists on the table. Thomas just stared, his fingers frozen over his keyboard. Good, James said finally. He deserves it. James? No, Mom. Don't tell me to feel sorry for him. Don't tell me to forgive him. He framed you. He killed his first wife. He kidnapped us. He deserves to die. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm just telling you the truth. Does he want to see us? Thomas asked quietly. He didn't ask, but I think he would like that, if you wanted to. I don't, James said immediately. I never want to see him again. What about you, Emma? Emma was still staring at nothing. When she spoke, her voice was distant. I don't know. I don't know what I feel. I spent 2 years hating you because of him. And now I'm supposed to hate him instead, and now he's dying. It's too much. It's all too much. She stood up abruptly and walked out of the room. A moment later, Caroline heard her bedroom door slam. Thomas closed his laptop. I'll go talk to her. Thank you. That left Caroline alone with James. He was still sitting at the kitchen table, hands clenched, staring at the wall. You're angry, Caroline said. Of course I'm angry. Aren't you? I was. For a long time I was so angry I could barely see straight. But anger takes a lot of energy, James, and I got tired of carrying it. So you just forgave him? Just like that? No, I don't think I'll ever forgive him. But I've accepted what happened. I've moved on. That's different from forgiveness. James shook his head. I can't move on. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. I hear his voice telling me that you were a criminal, that you stole from the family, that you didn't love us anymore. His voice cracked. I believed him, Mom. For 2 years, I believed every word. Caroline walked over and put her hand on her son's shoulder. You were a child. He manipulated you. I was 15, old enough to know better, old enough to question what I was being told. James looked up at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. How do I live with that? How do I live with the fact that I abandoned my own mother when she needed me most? You didn't abandon me. You were lied to. I should have visited. I should have written. I should have done something. James, listen to me. Caroline knelt down so she was at eye level with her son. What your father did to this family was not your fault. You were a victim too. We all were. And the only way we get through this is together, not by blaming ourselves, not by carrying guilt that doesn't belong to us. James stared at her for a long moment. Then he collapsed into her arms, sobbing like the child he still was in so many ways. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know, baby. I know. The next few weeks were difficult. Emma alternated between rage and depression sometimes within the same hour. James threw himself into his schoolwork with even more intensity, as if academic achievement could somehow make up for everything else. Thomas continued writing, filling page after page with words he refused to let anyone read. And Caroline tried to hold them all together. Patricia called one morning with news. Victoria is trying to make a deal. Caroline was in the middle of making breakfast. She nearly dropped the pan she was holding. What kind of deal? She says she has information about Daniel's business dealings, about other crimes he committed that no one knows about. She wants to trade it for a reduced sentence. Can she do that? The prosecutors are considering it. If her information is valuable enough, they might be willing to negotiate. Caroline felt cold anger spreading through her chest. Victoria. Even from prison, even after being convicted, she was still trying to play games. What kind of information does she have? I don't know the details yet. But Caroline, there's something else. She specifically mentioned you. Me? She claims she has evidence that could implicate you in some of Daniel's schemes. Real evidence this time, not fabricated. Caroline's mind raced. Was Victoria bluffing? Or was there something Caroline had overlooked? Some connection to Daniel's criminal activities that she had not been aware of? That's impossible. I didn't know anything about Daniel's illegal dealings until after my arrest. I believe you. But the prosecutors might not. Victoria is desperate. She'll say anything to get her sentence reduced. What do we do? For now, we wait. I'll keep digging and find out exactly what Victoria is claiming. In the meantime, try not to worry. But Caroline did worry. She worried constantly. Every time her phone rang, she expected bad news. Every time someone knocked on the door, she expected federal agents coming to arrest her again. A week later, she got the call she had been dreading. Mrs. Ashford, this is Agent Morrison from the FBI. We need you to come in for questioning. Caroline's blood went cold. Morrison, the same agent who had investigated the original fraud case, the one who had believed Daniel's lies and helped send her to prison. Questioning about what? Victoria Chen has made certain allegations. We need to verify her claims. Am I being arrested? A pause. Not at this time, but we strongly recommend you cooperate. Caroline called her lawyer immediately. Marcus Bell had been replaced by a high-powered attorney named Sarah Goldman, someone Patricia had recommended. Sarah met her at the FBI field office, and together they walked into an interrogation room that felt all too familiar. Agent Morrison sat across from them. He looked older than Caroline remembered. Tired. Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Ashford. What are Victoria's allegations? Morrison opened a file. Ms. Chen claims that you were aware of Daniel Ashford's fraudulent business practices and that you actively participated in money laundering through a charitable foundation you ran. That's ridiculous. My foundation was completely legitimate. We have records showing significant donations to your foundation from shell companies connected to Daniel Ashford's illegal operations. Caroline felt the floor dropping out from under her. I didn't know where those donations came from. I accepted contributions in good faith. Ms. Chen says otherwise. She says Daniel told her that you were in on it, that you knew exactly where the money came from and you helped hide it. Victoria is a convicted criminal who will say anything to reduce her sentence. She helped Daniel frame me. Why would you believe her? We're not saying we believe her. We're saying we need to investigate. Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Ashford, if your innocent cooperation is in your best interest. Sarah stepped in. My client has nothing to hide, but we're not going to sit here and answer accusations based on the word of a woman who has every motivation to lie. Then help us disprove her claims. Give us access to your foundation's records. Let us interview your staff. Show us there's nothing there. Caroline looked at Sarah. Her lawyer nodded slightly. Fine, Caroline said. You can have everything, because there's nothing to find. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of agents going through every document, every transaction, every email related to Caroline's charitable foundation. 3 weeks of interviews and depositions and sleepless nights. In the end, they found nothing. The donations from Daniel's shell companies had been made without Caroline's knowledge. The foundation's records were spotless. Every dollar had been accounted for, spent on legitimate charitable causes. Victoria's allegations fell apart under scrutiny. We're closing the investigation, Morrison told her at the end of it all. No charges will be filed. And Victoria, her deal fell through. The information she provided was either fabricated or already known. She'll serve her full sentence. Caroline should have felt relief. Instead, she felt exhausted, drained, like she had been running a marathon that never ended. Thank you, she said mechanically. Morrison hesitated. Mrs. Ashford, for what it's worth, I'm sorry, about everything. I should have looked more closely at the original case. I should have seen the inconsistencies. Yes, you should have. If there's anything I can do, there's nothing. Caroline stood up. I spent 2 years in prison because you didn't do your job. An apology doesn't change that. She walked out without looking back. That night, she finally told her children about the money. She gathered them in the living room again. This time, they came willingly, sensing that something important was about to happen. When I visited your father in prison, he told me something. Something I've been struggling with ever since. What? Emma asked. There's money, hidden money, about $40 million in offshore accounts that the government never found. Caroline pulled out the piece of paper Daniel had given her. He gave me the account numbers. He said he wants you to have it. Silence. Then James laughed bitterly. Of course there's hidden money, because that's exactly what Dad would do. Steal and cheat and lie his whole life, and then try to buy his way back into our good graces from his deathbed. I don't think that's what he's trying to do. No, then what is it? I think it's the only thing he has left to give. He can't apologize enough. He can't undo what he did, so he's giving you this instead. Blood money, Emma said. That's what it is. Money he made by destroying people's lives. Probably, yes. And you want us to take it? Caroline hesitated. This was the question she had been wrestling with for weeks. Was it right to accept money that had been obtained through fraud and corruption? Was it right to benefit from Daniel's crimes? I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to burn it, to give it all away, to pretend it doesn't exist. But another part of me thinks about your futures, college, careers, the things you could do with that kind of financial security. I don't want it, James said firmly. I don't want anything from him. Me neither, Emma agreed. We can take care of ourselves. Thomas was quiet. He was always quiet. But when he finally spoke, his words surprised everyone. What if we did something good with it? They all turned to look at him. Think about it. Dad made that money by hurting people. What if we used it to help people instead, start a foundation, fund scholarships, support victims of fraud, turn his legacy into something positive? Caroline stared at her youngest son. Sometimes she forgot how thoughtful he was, how deeply he processed the world around him. That's actually a good idea, Emma said slowly. It's stupid, James argued. It's still dirty money. Money is just money, Thomas said. It doesn't have a moral value on its own. It's what you do with it that matters. Dad used it to destroy. We could use it to build. James shook his head. I can't believe you're actually considering this. I'm considering all options. That's what smart people do. Don't talk to me about being smart. I'm not the one defending our murderer father. I'm not defending him. I'm trying to figure out how to move forward. You want to stay angry forever? Fine, but that's not going to change anything. James stood up abruptly. I'm done with this conversation. He walked out. A moment later, they heard his bedroom door slam. Just like Emma, a few weeks before. Caroline sighed. Well, that went about as well as I expected. He'll come around, Thomas said. Eventually. You really think we should use the money for charity? I think it's better than letting it sit in some offshore account forever, or letting the government seize it. At least this way something good comes from Dad's life. Emma nodded slowly. I agree with Thomas. It feels wrong to just take it, but using it to help people, that feels different. Caroline looked at her two youngest children. They had grown so much in the past few months, become wiser, more thoughtful, more resilient. Okay, she said. We'll start a foundation, but only if James agrees. We do this as a family, or we don't do it at all. And getting James to agree took another month. He resisted at first, refused to even discuss it. But slowly, through countless conversations and arguments and tears, Caroline watched her son's anger begin to soften. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Thomas had finished the first draft of his novel and asked the family to read it. James refused initially, but Emma convinced him. Just read the first chapter. If you hate it, you can stop. James read the first chapter, then the second, then the third. By the end of the night, he had read the entire manuscript. The novel was about a family destroyed by secrets, a father who lied, a mother who suffered, children who had to figure out how to rebuild their lives from the wreckage. It was fictional, but every page was infused with the pain and confusion and eventual hope that Thomas had experienced. The last chapter was about forgiveness, not forgiving the father for what he had done, but forgiving yourself for believing his lies, for being human, for wanting to trust the people you loved. James finished reading at 3 a.m. He found Thomas still awake in his room waiting. This is really good, James said. Thanks. Is this how you really feel, all this stuff about forgiveness and moving on? I don't know. I think so. I'm still figuring it out. James sat down on the edge of his brother's bed. I've been so angry for so long. It's like this fire inside me that never goes out. And every time I think about Dad, about what he did, the fire gets bigger. I know. But reading this, I don't know. It made me think. Maybe being angry forever doesn't hurt Dad. It only hurts me. That's what I was trying to say. James was quiet for a moment. The foundation thing, the charity, I still think it's wrong to use Dad's money. Okay. But I also think Thomas is right. Money is just money, and if we can turn something evil into something good... He trailed off. Are you saying you'll do it? I'm saying I'll think about it, really think about it, not just react. Thomas smiled. That's all I'm asking. A week later, James told Caroline he was in. They started the Maria Ashford Foundation, named after Daniel's first wife, the woman whose murder had started everything. It felt right, a way to honor a victim who had been forgotten for over 2 decades. The foundation focused on 3 areas: support for families affected by financial fraud, scholarships for first-generation college students, and resources for victims of domestic abuse and manipulation. Elena Vasquez, Maria's sister, became the first board member. She cried when Caroline asked her. Maria would have loved this, Elena said. She always wanted to help people. That's why she became a social worker, before Daniel. Then we'll help people in her name. The foundation launched quietly. No press releases, no media coverage, just a simple website and a mission statement. Within 3 months, they had distributed over $2 million in grants. Within 6 months, they had helped hundreds of families. And within a year, the Maria Ashford Foundation had become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the country. Daniel died on a Tuesday in March. Caroline received the call from the prison. She had been expecting it for weeks. Daniel's condition had deteriorated rapidly. By the end, he was barely conscious, drifting in and out of awareness. He asked for you, the prison chaplain told her. In his lucid moments, he kept saying your name. Caroline did not know how to feel. Sad, relieved, guilty for not being there. She had not visited Daniel again after that first meeting. Part of her had wanted to. Part of her had wanted to watch him fade to see the man who had destroyed her life finally meet his end. But a larger part of her knew that she did not need that. She had already won. Daniel's death was just an ending. The real victory was the life she had built since. She told the children that evening. Emma cried. Despite everything, despite the anger and the betrayal and the pain, she cried for the father she had lost. James did not cry, but he did not rage either. He just nodded slowly like he had been expecting this news and had already made his peace with it. Thomas asked if there would be a funeral. I don't think so, Caroline said. He didn't want one. He told the prison to cremate him and scatter the ashes somewhere anonymous. So that's it. He's just gone. That's it. They sat together that night, the 4 of them, mother and children, a family that had been torn apart and slowly, painfully stitched back together. I have something to say, James announced. Something I've been thinking about for a while. What is it? I've decided to change my major. I was studying business, like Dad wanted, but I don't want to be like Dad. I don't want to spend my life chasing money and power and success. He paused. I want to be a public defender. Help people who can't afford lawyers. People like you were Mom when they first arrested you. Caroline felt tears spring to her eyes. James, that's wonderful. I figured the best way to make up for what Dad did is to spend my life doing the opposite, protecting the innocent instead of destroying them. Emma spoke up. I'm going back to school, not Columbia, somewhere smaller. I want to study psychology, help people heal from trauma. And I'm going to finish my novel, Thomas added, then start another one. I want to tell stories about families like ours, so people know they're not alone. Caroline looked at her 3 children, her babies who had grown into adults, who had survived the worst their father could throw at them and emerged stronger. I'm so proud of you, she said. All of you. What about you, Mom? Emma asked. What are you going to do? Caroline had thought about this question many times. After everything that had happened, what did she want from the rest of her life? I'm going to run the foundation, she said. Help as many people as I can. And I'm going to write a book. Our story, from the beginning. Why? Because what happened to us could happen to anyone. Manipulation, betrayal, being framed for crimes you didn't commit. I want people to know that it's possible to survive, to fight back, to win. And to forgive, Thomas asked. Caroline considered the question. Forgiveness, the word she had struggled with for so long. Not forgive, she said finally. But move forward. There's a difference. 1 year after Daniel's death, the Maria Ashford Foundation held its first annual gala. 300 guests gathered to celebrate the work the foundation had done and to raise money for future programs. Caroline stood at the podium looking out at the crowd. Patricia was there beaming with pride. Elena Vasquez sat at a table near the front, dabbing at her eyes. And in the back, standing together like the united front they had become, were Emma, James, and Thomas. 5 years ago, Caroline began, my life was destroyed. My husband framed me for crimes I didn't commit. I spent 2 years in prison. I lost my children, my reputation, my sense of who I was. The room was silent. When I got out, I was consumed by revenge. I wanted to make the people who hurt me pay. And I did. My husband died in prison. His mistress is still serving her sentence. In one sense, I won. She paused. But revenge doesn't heal anything. It just transfers pain from one person to another. The real healing came after, when I focused not on destroying my enemies but on rebuilding my life, when I reconnected with my children, when I started this foundation. She looked at Elena. This foundation is named after Maria Ashford, my husband's first wife, a woman who was murdered for knowing too much about the man she loved, a woman who never got justice in her lifetime. But Maria's memory lives on in every family we help, every scholarship we fund, every victim we support. Caroline's voice grew stronger. Tonight, I want you to think about what it means to truly win. It's not about destroying your enemies. It's not about getting even. It's about taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and turning it into something beautiful, something that helps others, something that matters. She raised her glass. To Maria, to second chances, and to the power of turning pain into purpose. The room rose to their feet, applauding. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the caterers had cleaned up, Caroline stood alone in the empty ballroom. She thought about everything she had been through, the betrayal, the prison, the rescue, the trials, Daniel's death, the foundation. It had been a long road, and it was not over. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles, more moments when she wondered if she had made the right choices. But standing there in that quiet room, Caroline felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not perfect peace. Not the absence of pain or the erasure of memories, but a deep, settled certainty that she had survived the worst and come out stronger. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Mom, thank you for tonight. Thank you for everything. I love you. Caroline smiled and typed back, I love you too, all of you, forever. She put the phone away and walked out into the night. The city spread out before her, glittering with lights and possibilities. Somewhere out there, families were struggling, people were being betrayed, innocent people were being accused of crimes they did not commit. And tomorrow, the Maria Ashford Foundation would be there to help them. Because that was what it meant to truly win. Not revenge, not destruction, but transformation. Caroline took a deep breath of the cool night air and headed home to her children. 3 years had passed since the gala. 3 years of growth, healing, and rebuilding. The Maria Ashford Foundation had helped over 5,000 families. James had graduated law school and started working at a legal aid clinic in Brooklyn. Emma had completed her psychology degree and was interning at a trauma center. Thomas had published his novel to critical acclaim, with reviewers calling it the most honest portrayal of family betrayal they had ever read. And Caroline had written her book. Buried Alive, A Survivor's Story hit bookstores on a crisp October morning. By noon, it was the #1 bestseller on every major platform. By evening, Caroline's phone was ringing nonstop with interview requests. Patricia called her that night, breathless with excitement. Have you seen the numbers? You've sold 200,000 copies in 1 day. 1 day, Caroline. I didn't write it for the numbers. I know, but the numbers mean people are listening. People are reading your story and understanding what happened to you. That matters. Caroline supposed it did. But sitting alone in her apartment, surrounded by copies of her own book, she felt strangely empty. The revenge was complete. The foundation was thriving. Her children were healthy and successful. She had everything she had fought for. So why did she feel like something was missing? The answer came 3 days later in the form of a letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. Caroline almost threw it away with the junk mail, but something made her open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in careful script. Dear Mrs. Ashford, my name is David Chen. Victoria is my mother. I know what she did to you. I know she helped Daniel Ashford frame you and destroy your life. I am not writing to defend her or ask for forgiveness. I am writing because I need to tell you something. Something my mother told me before she was arrested. Something about your husband that you don't know. If you're willing to meet, I'll be at the coffee shop on 5th and Madison tomorrow at 3 p.m. I understand if you don't come. But please, this is important. Caroline read the letter 3 times. Victoria had a son. She had never known that. In all the investigations, all the trials, all the media coverage, David Chen had never been mentioned. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Victoria was in prison. Daniel was dead. Whatever secrets remained were buried with them. What good could come from digging them up? But curiosity gnawed at her. Something about your husband that you don't know. What could that possibly mean? She had spent years uncovering Daniel's crimes. Robert had told her everything. Frank Morrison had confirmed it. What could Victoria's son possibly know that she didn't? Against her better judgment. Caroline went to the coffee shop. David Chen was younger than she expected, mid-20s, dark hair like his mother but softer features. He stood when she approached, nervous energy radiating from every pore. Mrs. Ashford, thank you for coming. I almost didn't. I know. Please sit down. They sat across from each other at a small table in the corner. Caroline studied the young man, looking for traces of Victoria's cruelty in his face. She didn't find any. You said you have information about my husband. I do, but first I need you to understand something. David took a deep breath. I'm not like my mother. I didn't know about what she did to you until after she was arrested. When I found out, I was disgusted. I haven't spoken to her since. That must be difficult. It is. She's my mother. I loved her. But I can't love someone who destroyed an innocent person's life. He met Caroline's eyes. What she did to you was unforgivable. Then why are you here? David reached into his bag and pulled out a thick folder. Because before my mother went to prison, she gave me these. She said I should keep them safe, that someday they might be valuable. What are they? Documents, records, evidence of things Daniel did that never came out during the trials. Caroline felt ice forming in her stomach. What things? David opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, photographs, handwritten notes. He spread them across the table. Your husband didn't just kill Maria. He killed others. The words hit Caroline like a physical blow. What? There were 3 other people. Business partners who threatened to expose him. A journalist who got too close to the truth. A former employee who was going to testify against him in a civil case. David pointed to photographs of 3 faces Caroline didn't recognize. Marcus Webb didn't just work security for Daniel. He made problems disappear permanently. Caroline stared at the photographs. 3 people, 3 faces. 3 lives ended to protect Daniel's empire. Why didn't this come out during the investigation? Because my mother hid the evidence. She thought it was her insurance policy. If Daniel ever turned on her, she would expose him completely. David's voice was bitter. She was always thinking about herself, even when she was destroying other people. And why are you telling me this now? Because these people had families. Families who never knew what happened to their loved ones. Families who deserved the truth just like you did. David pushed the folder toward Caroline. Take it. Give it to the FBI. Let them investigate. Let those families have closure. Caroline looked at the folder. More secrets. More crimes. More pain to uncover. She had thought it was over. She had thought Daniel's death had closed the final chapter. But now, sitting across from Victoria's son, she realized the truth. Some stories never really end. Why did your mother keep this? Caroline asked. If she was Daniel's accomplice, why would she collect evidence against him? Because she was afraid of him. Everyone was afraid of him. David's hands were shaking. My mother wasn't a good person, I know that. But she wasn't stupid either. She knew that sooner or later Daniel would dispose of her the way he disposed of everyone else. So she gathered proof, evidence she could use if she ever needed to protect herself. But she never used it. She never got the chance. You brought Daniel down before she could. A ghost of a smile crossed David's face. Ironic, isn't it? My mother spent years collecting ammunition against Daniel, and in the end it was the woman she helped destroy who took him down. Caroline processed this information. Victoria had been afraid of Daniel. That didn't excuse anything she had done. But it added another layer to the story, another shade of gray in what Caroline had thought was a black and white picture. "There's something else," David said. "Something about your children." Caroline's blood ran cold. "What about my children?" My mother mentioned it once before she was arrested. She said Daniel had contingency plans, ways to control the family even from prison, even from the grave. "What kind of contingency plans?" David hesitated. "I don't know the details, but my mother said something about trust funds, about conditions Daniel attached to the children's inheritance." Daniel didn't leave them an inheritance. Everything was seized by the government. The official assets, yes, but the hidden money, the 40 million. My mother said Daniel had conditions. Caroline thought about the paper Daniel had given her in prison, the account numbers and passwords. He had said he wanted the children to have the money, but he hadn't mentioned any conditions. "What kind of conditions?" "I don't know. Honestly, my mother only mentioned it once and she was drunk at the time, but she said something about Daniel not wanting to let go, about wanting to control the family forever." Caroline's mind was racing. Conditions. Control. Daniel's last manipulation reaching from beyond the grave. She needed to investigate. She needed to find out if there was something buried in those accounts that she had missed. "Thank you for telling me this," she said, standing up. "There's one more thing." David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "My mother wrote this for you. She gave it to me the day she was sentenced and asked me to deliver it when the time was right." Caroline took the envelope. Her name was written on the front, in Victoria's handwriting. "I don't know what's in it," David said. "I never opened it." "Why are you giving it to me now?" "Because I read your book. I read about everything you went through, and I realized that my mother owes you more than an explanation. She owes you the truth. All of it." Caroline looked at the envelope in her hand, a letter from the woman who had helped destroy her life. What could Victoria possibly have to say? "I'm sorry," David said, "for everything my mother did. I know apologizing doesn't change anything, but I wanted you to know that not everyone in her life was like her." "You seem like a good person, David." "I try to be. It's hard knowing where I come from, knowing what my mother is capable of." He stood up. "I should go. Thank you for meeting with me." He walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Caroline alone with the folder and the envelope. She sat there for a long time, staring at Victoria's handwriting on the envelope. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to burn it unopened and never think about Victoria Chen again. But Caroline had never been able to leave questions unanswered. It was what had driven her to expose Daniel. It was what had kept her fighting when everyone else had given up. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages long. Caroline took a deep breath and started reading. "Dear Caroline, if you're reading this, then David found you. Good. He's a good boy. Better than I deserve. I'm writing this the night before my sentencing. By the time you read it, I'll have spent years in prison thinking about what I did to you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to understand something. I want you to know why. I met Daniel when I was 25. He was charming, powerful, everything I thought I wanted. But I didn't fall in love with him. I fell in love with what he represented. Power, control, the ability to make the world bend to your will. I saw how Daniel operated, how he eliminated anyone who stood in his way. And instead of being horrified, I was fascinated. I wanted to learn from him. I wanted to become him. By the time I understood what he really was, It was too late. I was in too deep. I had helped him cover up Maria's murder. I had helped him launder money and bribe officials and destroy anyone who threatened his empire. I was as guilty as he was. When Daniel told me about you, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Jealousy. Real burning jealousy. Not because you had him. I didn't want him by then. I was afraid of him. But because you had something I never had. Innocence. You actually believed in him. You actually loved him. And he was going to destroy you the way he destroyed everything else, and you didn't even see it coming. I told myself I was doing you a favor, that getting you out of the way quickly was better than letting Daniel play with you for years before discarding you. That was a lie. I wanted you gone because you reminded me of what I could have been. Before Daniel. Before I became this person I don't recognize. You survived. You fought back. You won. And when I saw you standing in that courtroom free and strong and vindicated, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Admiration. You did what I never could. You stood up to Daniel, and you beat him. There are things I never told the prosecutors, things about Daniel's past, things about other crimes he committed. I gave the evidence to David because I knew that someday someone would need to know the truth. The full truth. Not the sanitized version that came out during the trials. There's also something about your children that you need to know. Daniel wasn't content to just control his empire. He wanted to control his legacy. He set up the hidden accounts with conditions, specific conditions that would only be revealed if someone tried to access the money. I don't know what those conditions are. Daniel never told me the details. But I know they exist, and I know Daniel well enough to know that they won't be pleasant. I'm sorry, Caroline, for everything. I know those words are meaningless coming from me, but I'm saying them anyway, because it's the only thing I have left. Victoria. Caroline read the letter twice. Then she pulled out her phone and called Patricia. I need you to look into something. Daniel's hidden accounts. The $40 million he gave me for the children. What about them? I think there are conditions. Conditions Daniel didn't tell me about. I need to know what they are before we access that money. Patricia was silent for a moment. Where is this coming from? Victoria's son found me. He had documents, evidence, and a letter from Victoria herself. Can you trust him? I don't know. But I can't ignore this. If Daniel set a trap in those accounts, I need to know before my children walk into it. Patricia agreed to investigate. 3 days later, she called back with news that made Caroline's blood freeze. You were right. The accounts have conditions built into them. Smart contracts activated by specific triggers. If anyone tries to access the funds, the conditions automatically activate. What conditions? I couldn't get all the details, but here's what I found. First, if any of the children publicly denounce Daniel or participate in any activity that damages his reputation, they forfeit their share. Second, if any of the money is used for the Maria Ashford Foundation or any organization connected to it, all funds are automatically transferred to a secondary account that we can't trace. Third, and this is the worst part, if any of the children change their legal name, if they try to distance themselves from the Ashford name, they lose everything. Caroline felt sick. Even from the grave, Daniel was trying to control them, trying to force his children to carry his legacy, his name, his reputation. There's more, Patricia said. The secondary account, the one the funds would transfer to if the conditions are violated. I traced it. It's connected to a law firm in Geneva, a firm that specializes in protecting the assets of deceased criminals. So if we try to use the money for the foundation, it just disappears. Essentially, yes. Daniel created a system that punishes his own children for doing anything good with his blood money. It's brilliant in a twisted way. He knew you would want to use the money for charity. He planned for it. Caroline sat down heavily. She had been so proud of the foundation, so proud of turning Daniel's fortune into something positive, and all along Daniel had been one step ahead. What do we do? I don't know yet. These contracts are complex. It would take months, maybe years, to find a way around them, and there's no guarantee we'd succeed. Caroline thought about her children, about the money sitting in those accounts poisoned by Daniel's conditions, about the trap he had laid for them. Then she thought about something else, Something Thomas had said years ago when they first learned about the hidden money. Money is just money. It doesn't have a moral value on its own. It's what you do with it that matters. "What if we don't try to access the money?" Caroline said slowly. "What do you mean? What if we just leave it there forever? Let it sit in those accounts until the end of time. Daniel wanted to control us with that money. What if we simply refuse to be controlled?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "That's $40 million, Caroline." "I know, but my children don't need it. They've built their own lives, their own careers, their own identities. They don't need Daniel's blood money, and they certainly don't need the strings he attached to it." "You'd be walking away from a fortune." "I'd be walking away from a trap. There's a difference." Caroline called a family meeting that night. She told her children everything: the documents from David Chen, Victoria's letter, the conditions attached to the hidden accounts. When she finished, James was the first to speak. "Burn it." "What?" "The account numbers, the passwords, everything. Burn it all." His voice was fierce. "I've spent 3 years trying to escape Dad's shadow. I changed my career because I didn't want to be like him. I'm not going to let him control me from the grave." "But James, that's $40 million. "I don't care if it's 400 million. It's dirty money with dirty strings attached. Dad wanted to control us even after he was dead. This is how we tell him he lost. Permanently." Emma nodded slowly. "I agree with James. When I found out about the foundation, about what we were trying to do with Dad's money, I felt like maybe something good could come from all the bad. But this," she shook her head, "this isn't redemption. This is another manipulation." Caroline looked at Thomas. "What do you think?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I think Dad always underestimated us. He thought money was power. He thought he could buy our loyalty even from the grave. But we're not him. We don't need his money to be successful. We don't need his name to have identity. And we don't need his approval to be happy. So we walk away. We run away, fast and far, and we never look back." Caroline felt tears streaming down her face. Her children, her beautiful, strong, resilient children. They had survived everything Daniel had thrown at them, and now offered a fortune that could change their lives. They were choosing freedom instead. "There's one more thing," Caroline said. "Victoria's letter mentioned other victims, people Daniel killed that we didn't know about. David gave me the evidence." "What are you going to do with it?" Emma asked. "I'm going to give it to the FBI. Those families deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. They deserve closure. Even though Daniel's already dead, even though there won't be a trial. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth. Those families have been living with questions for years, decades. If I can give them answers, I have to try." The investigation took 6 months. The FBI verified David Chen's documents and confirmed what Victoria had written in her letter. Daniel Ashford had been responsible for at least 3 additional murders. Marcus Webb, his head of security, had been the triggerman. Webb was located in Costa Rica, arrested and extradited to face charges. 3 families finally learned what had happened to their loved ones. Caroline met with each of them personally. She sat with grieving widows and confused children and elderly parents who had spent years wondering why their son or daughter had suddenly disappeared. She told them everything. She answered their questions. She cried with them and held their hands and promised that their loved ones would not be forgotten. The Maria Ashford Foundation established a memorial fund in the names of all Daniel's victims. Not just Maria, all of them. Every person who had been sacrificed to protect Daniel's empire. Thomas wrote about it in his second novel, a story about the ripple effects of one man's cruelty, about the lives destroyed and the families shattered and the long, painful process of healing. The book was dedicated to the victims, all of them, named and unnamed, known and unknown. 5 years after Daniel's death, Caroline stood at a podium in front of the largest gathering the Maria Ashford Foundation had ever hosted. Over 1,000 people filled the ballroom, donors, volunteers, families who had been helped by the Foundation's programs, survivors who had rebuilt their lives from the ashes. Emma sat in the front row next to her husband, a fellow psychologist she had met during her residency. James was there with his wife, a public defender like himself. They had met arguing opposite sides of a case and fallen in love during the appeal. Thomas sat alone as he preferred. He was working on his fourth novel, a story about a woman who discovers her husband is not who she thought he was. When Caroline had asked if it was autobiographical, he had just smiled and said, "All stories are autobiographical in some way." Patricia was there, of course. She had become more than a friend over the years. She had become family, the sister Caroline had never had, the partner who had believed in her when no one else did. And in the back of the room, standing alone near the exit, was David Chen. Caroline had not expected him to come. She had not seen him since that day in the coffee shop years ago. But there he was, watching, listening, a reminder of how complicated the world really was. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Caroline began. "7 years ago, I walked out of a federal prison after serving 2 years for crimes I did not commit. I was angry, I was broken, I was consumed by a desire for revenge against the man who had destroyed my life." The room was silent. "I got my revenge. My husband died in prison. His mistress is still serving her sentence. The people who hurt me were punished. But here's what I learned. Revenge doesn't heal you. It just gives you something to focus on while you avoid the real work of putting yourself back together." She looked at her children, at the family she had nearly lost and fought so hard to rebuild. "The real healing came after, when I stopped focusing on what I had lost and started focusing on what I could build. When I stopped defining myself by my pain and started defining myself by my purpose." She thought about Victoria's letter, about David Chen standing in the back of the room, about the complicated web of choices and consequences that had led everyone to this moment. "Someone told me once that money is just money. It doesn't have a moral value on its own. It's what you do with it that matters. The same is true of pain. Pain is just pain. It's what you do with it that matters." Caroline felt tears threatening to fall, but she kept her voice steady. "This foundation exists because I chose to do something with my pain, because my children chose to help me, because hundreds of volunteers and donors chose to believe that something good could come from something terrible." She raised her glass. "Tonight I want to celebrate that choice. The choice to transform rather than destroy. The choice to heal rather than hurt. The choice to build a future rather than dwell in the past. That choice is available to everyone in this room. To everyone who has ever been betrayed, abandoned, destroyed by someone they trusted. You can choose revenge. Or you can choose redemption. I know which one I chose, and I know which one I would choose again." The room erupted in applause. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the caterers had cleaned up and her children had hugged her goodbye, Caroline found David Chen still waiting by the exit. "You came," she said. "I almost didn't. I wasn't sure I would be welcome. You're always welcome. You helped bring the truth to light. That matters." David nodded slowly. "I visited my mother last month, first time in years. How was she? Different, smaller somehow. Prison has changed her. She's not the person I remember." "People change. Do they?" David looked at her with searching eyes. "Do people really change, or do they just get better at hiding who they really are?" Caroline thought about the question, about Daniel, who had hidden his true nature for decades, about Victoria, who had transformed from accomplice to prisoner, about herself, who had gone from victim to survivor to advocate. "I think people can change," she said finally, "but it's not easy, and it's not automatic. You have to want it. You have to work for it. You have to choose it every single day. My mother says she's changed. She says she's sorry for what she did. She asked me to tell you. Do you believe her?" David was quiet for a long moment. "I want to. She's my mother. I want to believe that somewhere inside her is a person worth loving." He paused. "But I've also learned to be careful about what I believe." Caroline reached out and touched his arm. "That's wise. Hope is important, but so is self-protection. You can hope your mother has changed while still keeping yourself safe." Is that what you did with your children after everything their father put you through? I hoped they would come back to me. I hoped they would understand, but I also prepared for the possibility that they wouldn't. I built a life that didn't depend on their forgiveness, and when they came back, when they chose to believe me, it was a gift, not an expectation. David nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Ashford, for everything, for meeting with me that day, for listening, for not hating me because of who my mother is. You're not your mother, just like my children aren't their father. We all get to choose who we become. David left. Caroline stood alone in the empty ballroom, thinking about choices, about the millions of small decisions that had led her to this moment, about the paths not taken and the roads that disappeared behind her. She pulled out her phone and looked at a photograph she had saved years ago, her family before everything fell apart, Daniel smiling his charming smile, the children young and innocent, and herself a woman who had no idea what was coming. She used to hate that photograph, used to see it as a reminder of everything she had lost. Now she saw it differently. Now she saw it as a record of where she had started, a benchmark against which to measure how far she had come. Caroline deleted the photograph. She didn't need it anymore. She didn't need reminders of the past. She had a present that was full of love and purpose and meaning. She had a future that was wide open with possibility. And she had her children, her beautiful, resilient, extraordinary children, who had survived the worst and emerged stronger, who had chosen redemption over revenge, who had built lives defined not by their father's crimes, but by their own choices. That was Daniel's real legacy, not the empire he had built, not the crimes he had committed, not the pain he had caused. His real legacy was the family that had survived him, the family that had refused to be destroyed, the family that had turned his ashes into something beautiful. Caroline walked out of the ballroom and into the night. The city spread out before her, glittering with lights and possibilities. Somewhere in that city, Emma was going home to her husband. James was preparing for court in the morning. Thomas was writing his novel, putting pain into words that would help others heal. And Caroline was going home to start the next chapter of her life. Not a chapter about revenge, not a chapter about survival. A chapter about living, really truly living. For the first time in 7 years, she felt ready.